May, Neelam and I, my co-chair, we got together and as we were kicking off the Startup Council's agenda for the year, we thought, let's best hear directly from the startups. What do they want ASSOCHAM to deliver? So we got about 60 to 70 of industry representatives, startup representatives across stages, across industry verticals, across sectors. We got all of them together and we wanted to hear from them what they said. The top three, four things that stood out were, not surprising, number one was funding. Number two was they wanted to understand how would they get incubatorship and mentee support, mentor-mentee support. Number three was marketing, which is where we are today. And number four was how would you work with government, large corporates on POCs and engagement models. Those are four things that really stood out as the 80-20 amongst many other things that also came up. And since that time, we have kicked off various series of these conversations as masterclasses. Marketing excellence obviously is a cornerstone on which any startup's journey gets built, it gets pivoted, it gets moving one way or the other, a trajectory for a steep rise or a challenging situation to be in. And I'm sure all of us are seeing that. I think in today's session, I couldn't have expected a better roundup of participants. We have industry enablers, we have large corporates, we have startups in their own right, Razorpay and Byju's in large, very large startups, but very much in their own right. So I think we have a very good set of speakers in the session, and we have Shrikant to help us orchestrate as a moderator. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Varun. I'll hand it over to Shrikant to take it from here. I know we are a large group of participants, so I think for sake of time, I'll just immediately request us to get started.
I think Varun's going to lead the initial part.
Okay, Varun, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Can I request Shri Madhurans ji at Sales and Marketing Slang Labs to kindly make his industry address? You can share your screen. Madhuji, you are on mute.
Sorry for that. So thank you everyone for your time and the opportunity from ASSOCHAM to be present here and to make this industry address. So keeping in line with what ASSOCHAM has been doing with the Startup Launchpad, I've chosen a theme which is aligned with what we do as well as what ASSOCHAM is trying to accomplish through its program of Launchpad. So today I'm talking about what's the biggest opportunity for in terms of technology of this decade for India and the startups that can actually target that. So this is the overview of what I'll be talking about today, 4 simple points, and a lot of slides in this are mere numbers, but it shows the impact that digital apps or digitalization is having on India in this decade. So the biggest boom that's happening is right now digitalization. We have more than 400 million smartphones in just the tier 2, 3 cities and the rural region. And collectively, we would like to address this as Bharat, whereas the urban, metropolitan India parts can be called as the India. We have again 400 plus million Jan Dhan accounts, which shows the penetration that we have accomplished digitally, and also in terms of how many people have been reached financially. The financial penetration that's happened, the number of transactions in just June alone on UPI, which is just one platform, is mind-boggling. And if we look at the amount that is being transacted, it's also huge, right? What this shows is that there's a huge opportunity for a lot of startups, as well as the new users that we are seeing from e-commerce. In the last year was more than 90% of them are coming from the tier 2, tier 3 regions of India, which shows that a lot more new people are getting onboarded to this digital platforms. And similarly, another finding from Google is that more than 90% of the new internet users prefer to use or consume content and the internet in their own language, which is another insight that will be valuable for the startups, especially from the Startup Launchpad that we are seeing today. So what does it mean to build for 1 billion Indians, or the people who have just onboarded onto internet for the first time? using a smartphone and not come like you and me from a traditional, desktop and laptop and, phone kind of a transition. Main challenge for these people is that, English spelling and vocabulary becomes a barrier for them in using digital apps. In their smartphones, though they have apps, they primarily use it for consuming video content or probably sending audio messages, but they're not really comfortable using sophisticated apps or popular e-commerce apps because they do not understand the gestures and other visual language that they have. Similarly, the digital apps today are not only is it hard to learn for them, but also to remember and use on a regular basis, which means they become dependent on others who are more equipped to add or to use these digital apps in their phones. So how is it impacting them? Today, what we are seeing is, they cannot have the same kind of convenience, comfort, and opportunities that people in metropolitan region like you and me are enjoying today. So it could be the multitude of choices that they have when it comes to buying, which means they get the best price or the best deal for whatever products or goods that they want to buy. Or it could be an access to the daily conveniences. Like if I'm hungry, I can order online. Do they have the same thing at their location? Maybe, maybe not, right? Again, do people with, skills or abilities or products and services, are they able to access a wider market, beyond their own limitations of geographical borders? That's another challenge for them. And again, are they exposed to the new things, new developments, new happenings in the market? That again becomes a barrier for them, just because most of the things that we do today are in English and it's primarily touch-based environment. So if we take what's a world-leading design organization like IDEO is saying, it says, you should let the users look before they leave. What it means is don't commit them to start using your app with a paid version or, full-fledged version. Let them try out a few things before they actually, feel comfortable in going for a full version. Provide them timely guidance in using the app itself. Guide them, in their own language, in visually, and then also minimize the hierarchy. The hierarchy here refers to the way the information is presented. Like nesting of a lot of information, one inside the other or one behind the other, might actually be difficult for them to discover because they're not used to the visual and the touch paradigm. And most importantly, we should also make sure that they have multiple modes of interaction. So that's where new paradigms of user interface actually open up as an opportunity for, for enabling these users to get on the digital bandwagon. And then we have there are regional nuances and local aesthetics that needs to be embraced when we design products, whether it is physical product or digital products or even services. Again, this makes sense to tap these kind of users, and most importantly, speak in a language or communicate in a language that they're most comfortable with. So with these 6 guidelines, you can say, for designing products and services, what does it mean? We say, let your product talk. So what do we mean by that? Voice is one of the most natural ways to interact for these tier 2, tier 3 regional consumers when it comes to interacting, whether it's with people or businesses. Similarly, vernacular is what they expect most, and they are not comfortable using English. So let them speak in their own language. So what we have as one of the biggest opportunities today in the technology space is a voice plus vernacular interface, which can actually enable hundreds of millions of users to get on board the digital bandwagon. And this means there's a huge untapped market that is available for the startups, especially the kind of startups that we see in Startup Launchpad. Slang Labs is one such startup, which has actually tried to tap this kind of a market where there are millions of users who can be empowered to be as comfortable, convenient, and empowered as people like you and me. So we offer a multilingual voice assistant for existing mobile and web apps in various domains. It can be extended as we grow. And we are a company of just 20 people based in Bangalore, but we are building for 1 billion people, who can onboard the e-commerce journey. So with that, I would like to end this presentation. Thank you all for your opportunity.
Thank you, Madhuji. Can I now request Mr. Thomas Verghese, Chairman of the ASSOCHAM National Council on Branding and Marketing, to please give the industry address. Anantji, you can share the screen.
Thank you. Thank you, Varun. And thank you, Rohit, for having me on this call. I hope you people can hear me.
Yes, we can.
So Anant, please put on the presentation. So good afternoon to everyone on the call, all my panelists, members, and people who have registered for this call. So I think the subject that we were supposed to take up, Anant, this is the wrong presentation. Was startup market and marketing excellence. That is the theme of today's session. Next slide, please. So the startup market in India is amongst the third largest startup ecosystems. We are seeing a year-to-year growth of a consistent annual growth of 12 to 15%, and 2 to 3 tech startups are born every day. But what is very important in all this is to ensure that more than ever, one has to differentiate oneself from the very beginning to get the right customers. And I think Madhu has talked about all the enabling infrastructure in the previous presentation, which makes India a very good place to have a startup because of the larger use of technology today by most of the consumers at large. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So what are the trends that we see? These are a kind of mega trends. The convenience over experience, where customers are buying more and more online since there's more variety and better deals. The use of social media marketing is an effective tool, but it's very important that it's used wisely. You could spend a lot of your advertisement budget on just this if you don't target your customers wisely. Themes of sustainability, local production, which are becoming more and more prevalent. And of course, increasing spends on luxury products and discretionary items caused by higher liquidity. So these are some of the trends we see around, particularly in today's context. Next. So what were the marketing mantras that I can talk about in the startup ecosystem? First and foremost is be where the world is going. No matter what your size or service or your product is about, marketing is all about identifying through consumer insight the unmet need of the customer and convincing them that they need it. And very important to understand that good marketing makes the company look great, smart, and great marketing makes the customer look smart. So obviously we need to make the customers look smart. And very importantly, we must remember that nothing sticks in our heads better than a story. So storytelling can express the most complicated ideas in the most digestible ways, and a lot of our marketing should be hinged on this basic foundation. Next slide, please. So startup marketing is complex science. Some great ideas have failed due to a lack of marketing and customer awareness. Others have gone under due to poor strategy or execution. Still, some great ideas have spiraled into billion-dollar clubs. And founders are there everywhere in all the above cases. People who have done very well, people who have gone under. And it's very important to understand that a founder of a startup imagines the whole world will love their products or services. And that's usually the case. But in reality, only a negligible portion will like or take your product and put money where the mouth is. Therefore, it is very important that we look at the following 4 factors, which are very important, which is size the market well, look at affordability, understand what is the competition, and of course, see what is the value that you offer. The value is what is most important, which will actually get you your customers. Next. So what could be the marketing mantras and marketing, marketing strategy going forward? Have a long-term strategy, which should be linked to very clearly to the purpose. Purpose is becoming very important in today's world. So it is very clear while you define your long-term strategy, you also understand what is your long-term purpose. This should be in line with the vision and mission of your organization. The short-term strategy is important because that is where your first wins will come from. And therefore, the first baby steps would be to spreading awareness amongst your target customers, looking at a clear customer acquisition strategy, and more importantly, looking at a customer retention strategy. And remember that your short-term strategy should be linked to your long-term strategy. Next. Also very important that when you're going on the task of how to market your products, have a clear budget for marketing. Carefully plan how you intend to divide that budget. Your digital online media has been and is even more so in today's context become the most powerful tool to date, and you'd want to invest a good proportion of your advertising budget on that. But we must remember that we must not overdo our digital bit. Remember always that the curve remains flat beyond a point, and digital marketing is also getting expensive. You would want to spend a good proportion of your budget on promotions. A higher promotion in the long run is not good for your brand. That's conventional wisdom. This is, at the end of the day, a short-term strategy to kickstart the process of sales. It's also important that marketing managers, generally, we will notice in a startup, never look at any kind of ROI analysis on the marketing budgets, but this would be very crucial for a startup if he has to get it right going forward. Next. Next. Another thing which we have seen startups not really doing much of is innovation. In fact, throughout my career, I've seen that people are so busy in routine that innovation does not happen at all. In fact, innovation budgets are generally not spent and they're written back at the end of the year. So these are some of the potential pitfalls in a startup which you should watch out for. And founders should spend most of their time in innovation to grow to the next level, particularly when you have stabilized your operation and you have a team to manage the routine operations. And most importantly, if your startup is not growing, relook at your assumptions, capture your learnings, innovate and bounce back. You are sure to find the success formula if you reflect very objectively and if you reflect well. Next. So to conclude, I would like to say that marketing excellence really is, startups are fragile with limited budgets. Very important to set clear KPIs and measure your outcomes. And KPI will of course differ based on the startup. If not meeting the objectives, dump the initiative and redo it. That's the best thing rather than staying with something which is not working. And last but not the least, ensure that you have the right talent in the organization. Startup cannot have people who have come for training. They have to be experienced people with the right skill sets. Spend time in hiring the right talent. Keep the team motivated and ensure that they buy into the overall goal. And ensure that in a startup environment, you give freedom and empowerment, but hold people accountable for results. So this is really the sum and substance of what I have to say on startups and marketing excellence. It is a lot of conventional wisdom, and I hope that this would sort of, in a way, address some of the needs of people who are looking for what is really required in marketing startups and what is the kind of path to follow. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Varghese. Can I request Shri Shrikant Shastri, the Chairman of I3G Advisory Networks and President TiE Delhi NCR, to please start the session.
Thank
Over
you.
to Shrikant.
Thank you very much, Varun. It's a pleasure being amidst such a expert panel today. I'd first like to thank Madhu for painting such a fantastic picture of how the Bharat market is opening up. And Thomas, thank you for bringing forth your years of experience and enunciating some broad principles. So thank you, both of you. So when I was structuring the discussion today, one of the big debates that was playing in my mind was how broad or narrow do we make the scope of assume the scope of marketing to be for the purpose of today's discussion. And let me try and explain that. In many startups, marketing tends to be limited. Some startups, marketing tends to be limited to brand building and marketing communication. In some other startups, it includes that. It also includes customer acquisition, lead generation, etc. And in some others, it not just includes these things, but also includes retention, and the marketing head is also responsible for the growth numbers. So there is a wide pattern in the market. And for the purpose of today's discussion, I'd like to work with the assumption that marketing as a function encompasses all the things that I just described, and therefore it's a vital role. I want to before I get into a discussion mode with the panelists, I want to narrate two anecdotes, two very different anecdotes. The first anecdote plays to what Madhu spoke about, Bharat, language, all those issues. And this is my own story during the 18 months of COVID lockdown. So I have a maid who's a fantastic cook who works with us at home. And thanks to her, I put on a ton of weight in the last 18 months. She was, of course, ably guided by my wife. If I don't make that statement, I will not get dinner tonight. But essentially, here's what happened about 18 months ago. My maid is illiterate. She's never been to a school. She can't read and write. So she has her basic language is Telugu. She has all the challenges that Madhu pointed out. So one day she was looking at her phone and she was watching my wife look at a YouTube video for some recipe. And this lady was wondering how she could do it also without being literate or without speaking English. So actually what I did was I took her phone from her and showed her the voice button on the Google search. And I said, you know what? You just have to press this and say recipe Hyderabadi biryani Telugu. Hyderabadi biryani Telugu. And that opened up a completely new gateway for her. And I can tell you this, thanks to that minor intervention that I did, I've had the luxury of being treated to everything that under the sun that I could be fed, and I put on weight. And that is the magic of voice search, actually. And I saw it in action in front of me. That was the Bharat part of it. Earlier this week on Monday, moving to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, I was interviewing a person on a fireside chat, and this person can nowhere be in the Bharat market. This person was none other than Sanjeev Bikhchandani of InfoEdge. I was interviewing for a fireside chat. And obviously, he's in the news and hot property right now because of the Zomato IPO. So one of the questions I asked him was, and one of the audience members asked him, how do you decide at what stage any startup needs to raise how much money? Because every startup seems to be blowing up so much money on marketing. And he gave such a fantastic answer. He said, without understanding your business, I can't tell you how much money you should raise, but here's the fundamental principle I followed in all my businesses. My fundamental principle is I prefer to rely on customer money rather than investor money. If I can sell a good product with a great value proposition to a customer and that customer pays me, that money means a lot more to me. And that was such an eye-opener for everyone in the audience, and they suddenly said, wow, this is magic. But it was such a simple thing. But customers, revenues from customers, value proposition for customers, after all, that's the topic of today's discussion, marketing. And with that, I'm going to kickstart the discussion by asking my first question to someone who probably within this group has met more customers than any of us put together, none other than Neelam Dhawan. She's met customers from the mid-80s onwards. So Neelam, I'm going to actually pose the first question to you. You started your career as head of marketing at what was then called HCL Hewlett Packard. Way back, you were there in the 80s and 90s. When you compare marketing then, and when you look at the startups today, and I know you're on board of some great startups, What do you see as fundamentally having changed with respect to marketing? What is different?
Srikant, thanks for asking this question. It is indeed quite a learning for me as the journey I did through my career. Marketing has changed predominantly and in a big way. First of all, our customers have changed. They are far, far more knowledgeable than they were earlier. And the role we had of talking to them and explaining to them what a basic computer can do, we went on to now saying, you know what a computer can do, and these are the key differentiators, right? From offline, when there were only a couple of newspapers, today we look at offline, but we look more online. I think marketing today is far more targeted. It's not about spray and pray to God, kahin to lagega, kisi ko to lagega ki wo hamara ad dekh ke they'll buy something from us. That isn't going to happen. So spray and pray doesn't work. It is very targeted market. So the startups must know who's my customer and what does the customer want. And my experience has been, if you can fulfill the demand of the customer, you will be getting a lot more business than you can. Today, one of the biggest changes I've seen, you have to build the brand for the company as well as the product. And that is a critical change. We used to take it for granted. People know HCL, people know HP, people know all my companies. So I only go and talk about the new product. And the ads would be on the product or service, and bottom it will be, the logo of the company saying it's a big company, and they're basically few words. But today, the startups, nobody knows the startup company. And that credibility of that company has to be built before you can sell the product, because we see many startups going out of business very, very quickly. And that is why it is important to build the trust on the company as well as build the trust on the product. And the last point I want to make, because I know we are short of time, is the 3 whys. Why should the customer look at me? Why should someone buy my product? Why should someone use my app? Why should they not look at my competitor, or how am I different from my competitor? And what's my value proposition? Am I satisfying a need, which Madhu talked about? If you can't satisfy a need, then your product is not going to do well. So your value proposition has to be well matched to the target audience, and you build the brand and you build the company. And that's the situation today.
Great. So targeted spending, not spray and pray. Build the brand, build the company, and the 3 whys. Great way to put it, Neelam. Thank you for that. I'm going to move to another person who is probably the target of envy for every CMO in the country because of the amount of money he possibly at his disposal, Atit Mehta. Atit, what's it like to be a marketing head at India's biggest unicorn? I'm guessing that marketing budgets are not a constraint for you at all. Every time you want to launch a new campaign, Byju's probably says, I'll go and raise some more money. Is that how it is? And how is it different from your earlier stints at HUL and Colgate Palmolive, where brand P&Ls were very, very tightly run? So how's the change been for you?
No, it's a very, very good question, and thank you for this question. So I would love to be in a scenario. In fact, any marketer or any business would be love to be in a scenario where the resources are infinite. It's an absolute misconception that there is infinite resources available. I will try to answer your second question first. I don't see any difference between HUL and Colgate and Byju's right now. It is, while we are spending big dollars, but everything is getting accounted, everything is getting calculated, every piece of unit economics is looked with a microscope. Since it's delivering the results, there is resources available. But tomorrow, if we end up doing something and if the resources are not available, that tap will get shut. So there is an absolute clear understanding amongst all of us and as an organization that every penny which we are spending, we will account for it and we will measure it, we will monitor it, we will review it, and we will iterate it if it's not working. So it's a process, and we repeat this every day, every hour. So there is absolutely no change between a lever's marketing budgets, which might run into close to $1 billion right now, India, and somebody like a Byju's who's spending reasonably good amount of monies to market their product, but the fundamentals remains the same, that it is measured and it is monitored.
I'm going to have one more follow-up question for you, Atit, right here. Like you, I started my career also with Unilever, and it's a great foundation for anyone in marketing and sales. Is there any one or two best practice that from Unilever days you faithfully replicated at Byju's, knowing that this cannot fail because this is so fundamental to marketing? What are one or two of those best practices?
Yeah, so see, we all know that Unilever is the mecca of marketing, and the best marketing leaders come from Unilevers. But one also needs to understand that Unilever is a very, very strong cost approached organization. So the single largest thing which I bought from Unilever to Byju's was looking at the cost in the right way, because running Unilever with such a huge complex setup with 85, 90 brands, there is a cost understanding which one learns and Unilever teaches you, and that's exactly what we try to implement. And it's all about then it's going through the process. You need to be very, very strong at planning. You plan, and then only you start execution. So planning input becomes a very, very critical thing. These are the two things I think I've learned at Unilever and trying to implement at Byju's.
Thanks, Atit. Varun, has Sandeep Goyal joined us? Would you know that?
Might take some time.
Okay, no problem. I'm going to move to Dipali and then get into a conversation with her. Dipali, you've worn so many different hats. You've been a marketing guru, practitioner, as well as a long-standing visiting faculty at SP Jain, a podcaster. So you probably keep tabs on what is really hot in marketing. And therefore, do you have any advice for startups that here are things you should not miss out on? For example, have you seen startups latch on to Clubhouse or podcasting or influencer marketing? What are some of the hot things in marketing that emerging or growing startups should be focused on and not miss out on, besides the obvious stuff?
Shrikant, you said it all. They should not miss out on anything.
Okay.
So, but apart from that, I think in my observation of mentoring a couple of startups, I think one of the dilemmas that they deal with is, and Neelam spoke about managing the brand, the product, bit is, how do you manage the founder as a brand, and how do you manage your product in the company as a brand? And that's where I'd like, this is very basic but very practical, Gyan, that the marketing head needs to manage the founder as a brand also. That's a very strong opportunity for providing, thought leadership and for providing the purpose, to the whole brand, which becomes very important. And that's how you manage the long-term, aspect of the marketing and brand, definitions. That's one thing I'd like to say. The second thing is in the area of what I find sometimes the mistakes that startups end up making, and that is not focusing on what I call the brand identity and brand design part of the brand. You are in a hurry, you want to launch, you start, you like something, and then you don't think about how this will translate in terms of the various formats that you would eventually get into. The discipline of brand identity is what I would, urge everybody, to focus on. And the third thing, since you're asking me about immediately what they need to do and what they should not miss out on, is I think a good understanding and try and get to know what the cookie-less world is going to look like. And if you have lost, although in India we are largely an Android market and it may not hit us so badly, but I think with markets where, especially, some of them cater to the US and where, it's an iPhone-led markets, I think a great understanding of what the cookie-less world is going to look like. My feeling is that we will go back to the basic principles of marketing. Email marketing will perhaps start doing better again. In between the fad had gone away. So that'd be my immediate, apart from the Clubhouse and the podcast and, every other social media that comes to us, I think staying latest on the marketing will help. So these are my 3 pieces of advice.
No, I think your point about cookie-less marketing is so true, because people know that it's on the horizon, but are not paying attention to it, and suddenly going to hit them one day, particularly the ones focused on the iPhone or iOS market. Very well said, actually. But I'm going to take up your earlier point about building the founder as a brand. I think it's so well said, because I see startups where the founder stays keeps a low profile in the background, and then there are founders at the other extreme. what would your ideal recommendation be? Should they be as much in your face like a Elon Musk or a Steve Jobs, or should they be an Azim Premji who's in the background? Where's the ideal actually? With your experience, what would you recommend?
I would imagine that in terms of reach, they should be definitely like Richard Branson or Elon Musk. But in terms of having the edges smoothened out, I would rather they be like Narayan Murthy and Azim Premji, where they provide the sagacious end, to the brand. Like I said, the thought leadership part of it, providing purpose to the brand, and also humanizing the brand. I think these are the three things that the founder brand should do.
Yeah. Now, I think for the benefit of the audience, I would say that if there's one piece of advice that we wanted to take away from today's session, founder as a brand is so vital because it takes the multiplier effect it has on your hiring, for example, your ability to hire great talent. You get inbound hiring requests, and that changes dramatically when the founder as a brand is very, very strong. So I would urge everyone to really focus on that. Thanks, Dipali. I'm going to move to Veda Narayanan. Veda, did I get your name right? I hope I can call you Veda. You are with your current Razorpay work, but prior to that, you hot startup sector, payments, edtech, health tech, e-commerce, travel. Now, no one's better placed than you to say, look, what works, what makes a great startup tick from a marketing standpoint when you look at all these hot sectors. What's your advice for the audience today?
I think some of the basic building blocks stay the same, very similar to what Atit mentioned. I think a lot of the first principles led best practices will stay constant, regardless of the category or the consumer persona that you're marketing to. You've got to have a very clear sense of the customer pulse, which might sound cliched, but it's actually true. You need to have a very clear sense when you say customer pulse. If you were to break it down, you need to know two things at the highest level. What is holding your customers back? What are the inertia points? What are the banana skins which are holding your customers back? You need to have a very clear sense of that. And what are the things that are propelling them forward towards your brand? What are their motivation points? What are their inertia points? Speed breakers and the lubricants. You need to have a sense of both. I think that's something which is very important. Your customer insight needs to be distilled to have this level of granularity and clarity. I think that's something which is very important. The second thing which I personally am a big believer of is that in the new age digital world that we live in, the kind of targeting that brands need to employ, especially applicable if you're a digital business, not so much for FMCG, but if you're a digital business operating in the new world order, you need to have the kind of targeting matrices you need to employ need to be more inside out, not outside in. The traditional form of targeting was more outside in, wherein as marketers, as business owners, we did our initial level of consumer research, and basis that hypothesis, we started framing our targeting matrices, our marketing campaigns. The new age form of targeting uses data. It looks at user behavior patterns on your website, on your application, and basis that source of truth, you either challenge your original targeting hypothesis or you validate that hypothesis. For example, at Healthify Me, when we started off, we always thought like everybody else, we thought the millennial was our ideal consumer persona. Turns out it wasn't. It was people actually who were older than the millennial age bracket, because those were the guys who were less healthy, they had more lifestyle conditions and had a greater propensity to pay. In Razorpay, again, a lot of times we think it's only the startup, VC funded startup crowd, which is our target persona. Turns out it's not, right? It is actually the SME, micro long tail SME, Aam Aadmi Janta, right? That essentially is the crowd that is gravitating towards digital payments, and that is being borne through basis the kind of behavior that we see. So a lot of the targeting matrices need to be inside out so that you can continuously challenge some of the assumptions, right, that you start off with as a business. The third one is something that most marketers do recognize, but you always need to have a sense of who are your forces and force amplifiers from your marketing arsenal. You need to figure out who your Rahul Dravid is, who your Virender Sehwag is, who are your regular, trustworthy, ROI driving, dhanda driving breadwinners, right? Which are your marketing channels, which will be your consistent run scorers, your Rahul Dravids, who are your Virender Sehwags, right? Who will essentially amplify the effect of all of the different forces. And they may not be, regular, consistent breadwinners against whom you can attach very clear ROI, and you can attribute very clear ROI. For example, a Facebook or a television advertising or a YouTube advertising per se, they may not match your, say, a Google search channel, for example, dollar for dollar in terms of their ability to drive ROI. And of course, this changes. The definition of what is force and what is a force amplifier changes from category to category. So you need to have a very clear sense of that and not use the same yardsticks for measuring success for both the forces and the force amplifier channels. You need to have a clear, it's like a football team. I often think of it this way, right? You've got various people in your football team. Your marketing channels also work together as a team, right? The Ronaldo might, carry away all of the fame and glory for having actually scored that goal, but he was aided and abetted by like 2-3 defenders and 3 midfielders. So your marketing channels work in a very similar fashion. Your brand channels might eventually end up taking away the lion's share of the ROI, but that's an amalgamation of all of the efforts that you're putting in as a team. So you've got to have a very clear sense of this. So that to me are 3 golden principles you need to stand by, regardless of the category that you operate in. And these are all season best practices that I would recommend from a marketing perspective.
So inside out, force amplifier, and the third one being?
Customer inertia points and motivation factors.
Customer inertia points and motivation. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So it was also interesting that you discovered at Razorpay that really your big customer base is in the small and mid-sized business segment and not the, was that discovery, was that your initial hypothesis or not really?
So the initial hypothesis was we would be, aiding and abetting a lot of tech-enabled startups, right? That was originally the vision. It turns out that we've seen a huge gravitation towards digital, towards technology by a lot of small and medium businesses in India, and we've noticed that change, especially more so in the last couple of years or so. This has obviously been accelerated, been force amplified again, if I were to reuse that same term, because of the pandemic itself. Which is why, and we are seeing a lot of these new age digital entrepreneurs who are not like Sachin and Binny Bansal from 7 years ago, who are not like Baiju Ravindran from Byju's, if I were to take the Byju's example, or like Harshil Mathur and Shashank Kumar from Razorpay, who understand the importance of digital and understand the nitty-gritties, the nuts and bolts of tech and digital. The new age digital entrepreneur understands the importance of digital, but they don't understand the details, nor do they want to. They want that level of complexity abstracted away from them. So they're looking for products and services that abstract this away, which is why at Razorpay we've launched a slew of these hashtag no-code products. Like a payment link, a payment page, which entrepreneurs, SME entrepreneurs who don't know anything about tech, they can start using in under 5 minutes. Essentially democratizing access to payment. So that is a case in point. We recognize this change, and we made sure that our product strategy, was a reflection of the change that we had to make.
Thank you, Veda. That was fantastic. Thomas, if I can come back to you, you outlined some great principles in your initial industry presentation. I'm going to request you to wear the hat of an Aditya Birla senior management person. While most of your businesses, I hate to use the word, are quote unquote traditional, but you also got a reasonably good footprint, not just in financial services, but you also have a presence in BPO through Minax, for example. Now, when you look at businesses like Minax or even your financial services business, do you see these businesses thinking like startups with respect to use of marketing, or are they, you really don't see any differences between the way they work and let's say what Madura Garments would work, for example?
No, I think it's a very interesting question. Our conglomerate is really made up of a large number of businesses, and we have new businesses, we have old age businesses, we have some traditional businesses. Definitely the businesses are working on the paradigms which suits their industry the most. So if you talk about Aditya Birla Capital virtually works across about 7-8 verticals in the space of financial management, financial investments, insurance, asset management, mutual funds, etc. So I think in each of these areas, they are trying to work in the manner in which is best suited for that particular industry, given the fact that some of the financial sectors in India are very highly regulated. So we see a lot of new investments in terms of basic big data analysis. We see a lot of investments in terms of digital marketing, the importance of digitization. The pandemic has brought with it the concept of, remote sensing of business, be it in insurance, be it in asset management, be it in mutual funds. So we've seen the use of customer acquisition, enabling simplicity and use of various apps which can help people remotely take an insurance policy or invest their money into the Sun Life insurance funds. So I think very clearly the ways of working are very, very customized to the kind of businesses you're in. And the same is true even for, let's say, ABFRL, which is now used to be Madura. The use of artificial intelligence, the use of augmented reality, the use of virtual reality, the use of all kinds of technologies, even in the concept of a brick and mortar store, while at the same time straddling a 360-degree omnibus approach to look at retail, physical retail, come online retail, is really a reflection of the times that we are in. So I would say that whether it is any of the new sectors, whether it's fintech or it is garment, fashion retailing, I think even in many of our conventional businesses, the use of technology has rapidly multiplied. And I would say that the pandemic, in a sense, somebody used, I think Veda used the word force magnifier, has actually become a force magnifier for adoption of new technologies. Yeah. So use of artificial intelligence, use of big data analytics, customizing your marketing campaigns, looking at IoT investments in plants to improve quality, to improve reliability of maintenance, to improve the getting it right first time, to reduce cost, to do better predictive maintenance schedules. So use of technology in virtually every walk of life in our businesses has become very, very critical now. And the adoption has been very, very high in the coming years.
Great summary.
I will not comment on Minax because Minax is no longer with us. We sold that business sometime.
Okay. No, my mistake. Thanks for pointing that out. Madhu, I'm going to come back to you. I think you had great insights into Bharat and tier 2, tier 3 markets, and you spoke about voice. Can you just bring it alive by taking the example of, let's say, health tech product, affordable medical device which needs to be taken to tier 2, tier 3 markets? How exactly would you advise voice technologies being used to market it in tier 2, tier 3? Just try and paint a picture for us so that we all walk away with a great deal of clarity, and who knows, you might come back and get some business from this.
Thanks for the question, Shrikant. So today what we see is, voice is not only a channel for marketing, right? But it's also a key ability that can make the product itself more usable and more accessible, right? For example, people who are not very conversant with an English or a touch interface can actually use voice to interact with the product. It could be as simple as, remotely sharing your patient medical records, or it could be an online diagnosis. People may not be able to use a WebEx or a Zoom today, but if they're able to activate the same with activate a medical product or an app with their voice, and then take the conversation forward with the doctor or a remote healthcare provider, it will be a lot easier for them. And similarly about sharing their internet, insurance records or anything like that. So voice becomes a key enabler for a bulk of the population today, who is from the Bharat region, as I was saying earlier.
Okay. Understood. No, that was helpful. I think that provides a great deal of clarity. I'd like to move on to Satyarth Priyadarshi. Satya, I know while you're presently working in Tata AIA as an insurance company, I'm not going to ask you a question on insurance, but I'm going to pick up a cue from what insurance companies do very, very well, which is to use multiple go-to-market channels, digital, direct sales, partners, agents, brokers. You use so many different channels. How do you resolve a debate within the company as to which channel should get how much priority? The reason I ask this, just yesterday I was part of a discussion at a startup where a similar discussion was going. Should digital be our primary channel? Should we have an agent-based channel? Should we have a channel that is complete offline in a slightly different respect? How do you resolve which channel gets how much investment? can you provide a word of advice for startups? Because everyone goes through this debate when working out their GTM strategies, actually.
So, Srikanth, honestly telling you, it's a matter of choice. Even if you go through all the insurance companies that are there in India, you will find each one has their own strengths. Some companies have chosen to actually rely on all 3 or 4 of the channels. Some have excessively dependent themselves on kind of one channel and not so much on rest of them. So it's a matter of choice. It's a matter of cost economics. It's a matter of where your strength lies, which channel has given you better returns, and so on and so forth. So for a startup, I would also kind of ask to focus on that. Right now, I mean, if I had suggested something maybe 5 years ago, it would have been meaningful. But my worldview, as the startups are growing right now and what's happening in the industry, it's kind of telling me that very few of what startups are planning are coming true, and it's more of what's happening to them. So I meet regularly. I meet with startups. I talk with them. Some of them I mentor. And what I see is that the startups start out thinking that this is the way forward and this is how we will make money. And then halfway through the journey, something happens. Somebody comes along and says, hey, you know what you're pitching is good, but you know, if it had this and this and this in the product, it would have made much more sense to us. And the startup founder goes back into the room and thinks, yeah, we have to back this big client. Should we build this? And eventually the answer comes out, yes, we should build this. And I can tell you at least 3 startups, I'll not name them, startups who started off as a website or an e-commerce. Then they went to pitch somewhere for their e-commerce solutions and affiliate services. And the company at the kind of other side said, how are you doing this chatbot on your website? And so they said, hey, that's easy. We can make one for you. And right now that company is primarily a chatbot company. So, I mean, that's what's happening with startups a lot. Plus, when dealing with companies like in BFSI, one of the challenges that startups usually face is capital, it's very expensive to make for BFSI because there are huge demands like VAPT and a couple of other tests which you can't escape. And the kind of build that you have to do also has to be very secure and robust. And so all of this, I mean, I would say that whatever works for a startup, whatever their experience, wherever they find a path, just move forward on that. Don't think that this is the right answer or that is the right answer. I mean, that's what I tell startups.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah. So I guess even within insurance, every company has a different mix, and startups will have to discover their own ideal mix as they go forward, as they get feedback from the market. I guess that's the gist of what you're saying. There's no one single answer. Make sense?
There's no one single answer.
Okay. Sudeep Goswami, sorry to keep you waiting, but as we head towards the final set of questions, this is probably the most important question. And the reason I held this back was Dell, as far as my memory goes back, was one of the earliest to sell direct, well before the world of internet came and direct to consumer became a fashion. And Dell used the phone very effectively in those days to book orders when every other IT company was selling through channels. How has you've stayed on in Dell for a long time. Obviously, you've seen the journey. How does Dell today measure ROI? And particularly do you still sell predominantly directly online? So those are my questions. ROI in the online context, how does Dell measure it today? And what's the takeaway for some of the startups actually?
Thanks. Even in the 90s, when we had the phone, we used a lot of predictive modeling and analytics to figure out segmentation and then talking to our customers. And since then, we have used a lot of technology to stay higher on the curve and ahead of what things would be. As a result, right now, a $100 billion company, we perhaps are operating at a good edge in terms of marketing. And ROIs are an important thing. The ROI is measured by various KPIs on simple things like marketing campaigns to even more abstruse things like the value of a brand and how much should you spend on branding. ROI is definitely a constant theme in terms of evaluating your marketing investment, but that's just perhaps a measure. How we look at it is that, do we have a long-term strategy? and how does that work for us with a midterm and localized thing. For example, on a long-term thing, we don't believe in celebrity endorsements. We believe the customer celebrity. So you'll find a theme worldwide. But in India, you'll find a lot of heavy emphasis on sports and education as we sort of change gears a bit in that. Also, while ROI is important and there are many channels, we tend to be multifaceted so that we have deeper conversations with consumers as well as businesses. So we have a huge analytics team in-house which looks at a lot of things about customers, their purchase journeys and their user experience, and tries to simulate that and see where bottlenecks could be and take care of that. And in that comes the part of demand too. So what I'm trying to say is we have grown from a very small startup to a much bigger organization right now. And ROI has been a measure that keeps us in check, but it is definitely defined by a larger vision, which then gets executed at local levels and kept checked on midterms and whatever it would be. That would be a short answer to what you would have.
Right. So you raised the point of ROI and celebrity. So I'm going to ask one question to Atit before I end with Rohit Bhayana. Atit, the reason I'm going to come back to you, this is a question that bothers many startups. How much of your marketing spend should quote unquote be in the measurable domain, performance oriented, ROI oriented, and how much of it should be to build a brand, whether the company brand or the product? How do you separate out the two budgets? Because beyond the point, the brand budget is measurable in terms of brand saliency, etc., but not as measurable as performance marketing in terms of actual sales. How do you think about it now? How have you thought about it in general?
It varies as per the life journey of the brand. So see, initially as you start, you are a reasonably new brand, people don't know you and you want early success. Because the faith in marketing will come in if you get early success. To get that early success, then it needs to be delivering you the output. So performance measurability will start taking a big chunk. But as you become bigger and bigger, and as the brand gets established, it's all about then creating equity, creating that brand love. And then you slowly and gradually shift budget. So at a mid-size level, when you have your first, second milestone achieved in terms of consumers who have become your subscribers or you have paid for your services, one should look at a 60-40 split. And as you become bigger and bigger, you need to then start looking at inorganic growth. So that's going to be then shifting the budget as high as 75-80%, which is going into building the brand and creating that love and equity.
Okay, that's good set of thumb rules. Thank you for that. With that, I come to Rohit. Everyone else on this call is consume money. The only person giving out money is Rohit Bhayana as a PE investor. So I've kept this question for him as a perfect lead up from what Sudeep said and what Atit said. Rohit, as a PE investor, you're giving out money, you get a funding charter from the startups you want to invest in. What metrics do you or your analysts use to figure out how much of the marketing money asked is really correct when the portfolio company says so much for technology, so much for team, so much for marketing? And how do you hold them accountable for outcomes after that once the money is spent?
Sure. So Shrikant, I think as much as we are the ones deciding, a lot of people on this group, Thomas and everyone else is deciding budget. So I think that, but I'll take that question in a different spirit. So Shrikant, first and foremost, I think we are largely guided in making these decisions by what the company sets as its own course. So that decision actually starts from the bottoms up. If you are just looking at bottoms up as how the decisioning or how the budget allocation is happening. So it's the usual same stuff: leads, the cost per leads, conversion, the lifetime value economics, all the usual. And everyone on this call, and I'm sure the audience understands that very well. So it's very standard in that sense. But I think where it starts becoming a differentiator is where those metrics actually in the long run, how are they playing out with the leverage the company is creating on its long-term unit metrics? So which means fundamentally, the marketing spend is going to somewhere sit on the EBITDA. And if the trend and the pattern is continuing, what are we talking on the EBITDA? And that's where I have often seen a big difference come vis-a-vis the thinking and the clarity of the founder and the management team, irrespective of the stage of the company. It could be an early stage company or a late stage company. But the difference that starts stepping out is, are they hiding behind the science and the metrics? Because digital, as an example, has propped up so many metrics. There are just so many metrics available that you can just lose yourself in the fog of metrics. Eventually, what is it doing in the eventual unit metrics of the company? Are you fundamentally saying that it's creating validation? Is it creating scale and therefore there's a leverage? Or is it creating market dominance, depending on what stage you are in? And that, to me, starts making a lot of difference in how you spend that budget. Obviously, you'll play to the hygiene, you'll play to the leads and the conversions and the lifetime values, but is that money creating a scale and sustenance, or it's creating dominance? That, to me, really becomes a difference in those conversations. Another part is where I've often seen in conversations, and this usually plays out when we are discussing size of capital in a round, is around anything to do with technology and marketing is almost justifiable as a burden. It's almost just coming into the meeting, just coming into a conversation. It's like, it's to do with tech and it's to do with marketing, and hence, how could you even debate it? How could you even, it's preordained, it's pre-justified. That is just such a big put off. It's such a big, it's almost like somebody saying, hey, don't you understand this? This is how it's supposed to be. That mental block, to me, with founders coming in very early is a bigger challenge. But otherwise, I think I would say 80-20 basis, 80% basis, I would be governed by how the company is looking at its own marketing budget, its own spend, and how therefore it plays in its own lifetime journey, versus really having something which is coming from a P or a VC perspective and trying to create a forcing function.
No, that was a fantastic statement, Rohit. What I'd like to do now, rather than continue this question answer format, maybe we'll do a quick round with everyone simply articulating in a few sentences what marketing excellence means to them, which is the theme of today's session. And we'll run through that quickly with everyone. And then at the end, if we have time, I'll check with Varun if there are questions. So I'm going to go in the same sequence. Neelam, would you like to go first? What does marketing excellence mean to you? Go for it.
So when I look at marketing excellence, it actually means that it helped grow the company's revenue. So the outcome of it is extremely important for me. And how often can consumers recall your brand? That is also another measure, because if you are targeting the right audience and you're targeting the right customers, your brand has to make some impact on them. Your marketing has worked if the person you're trying to sell to remembers your product or remembers your brand name. And I think, while we may say we should not measure return on investment, some companies say that, I personally think the number of leads, the number of closures are extremely important for anyone to see, am I spending the dollars in the right way? So marketing excellence to me means spend the money in a targeted way and get the results you are expecting to get from the campaign. I must say one thing, marketing excellence also means that if a campaign is not delivering results, cut it out. Let's have that bold decision in our heart to say, it's not worked, we should cut it out, rather than keep on at it and saying, why is this campaign not delivering the right results which we want? Lastly, Srikanth, I must say this to you. Many founders believe I have a marketing whiz kid sitting in my office. The responsibility is his to go and create the demand for my product and create the image for my company and my brand. I think that's a misnomer. You as the founder are actually representing your brand and your product in the best manner. And if you don't step out and talk to the customers and leave it to your marketing to do it, it may not yield the results which is expected. And I feel this excellence comes in when everyone in the company is proud of what that company is doing, and hence they talk to their community, to their friends about it. You really get the momentum when there are thousands of people, lakhs of people talking about your product, experimenting it and using it, and building this kind of a momentum is what marketing excellence means to me.
So grow revenues, build brand recall, everyone as a brand ambassador are the three things that you're saying. Great. Atit, you want to go next?
Yeah. In one line, if I have to say what is marketing excellence for me, it is having a higher consumer mindshare for your brand vis-a-vis having a higher market share. So there is a market share which defines our profitability, top line, bottom line, EBITDA, margins, everything. But if you are able to create a higher percentage, if you're higher than your market share in the consumer's mind space, if that's happening, and that always happens through marketing, and that's excellence for me then.
And that higher consumer mind share will eventually translate into market share and revenues. That's the assumption. Okay, great. Dipali?
Thanks. You know, while I was listening to Neelam and Atit, what I said, how do you test that the marketing team is excellent or marketing excellence, you know? And I have used one formula all my life, which is that if I go to the sales head and says, I'm willing to give my marketing budget to you, and you can run the amount of trade marketing budget in a larger company or do promos, you know, does he say, no, Dipali, I want you to keep your marketing budget back, you know? So I think to me, that is marketing excellence, one way of looking at it, where the organization really values, you know, what marketing does, whether it is in the area of performance marketing or whether it's in the area of brand building, you know. The second, I think, very important mantra that I want to leave with everybody on the marketing excellence side is that do you have enough pilots and prototypes happening within marketing where you can say that, look, I'm failing fast and I'm failing small. The failing small is very important. And in the digital world today, you know, if you can run many experiments, I have given this mantra to everybody to say use 5%, only 5% of your marketing budget to your team, you know, to run experiments where they're completely allowed to fail. And, you know, this way you will build a culture for innovation also. The last bit, and very important, I think this was covered in a recent McKinsey article, that I think if the marketing team can start thinking of themselves as a connector for the rest of the organization, they need to represent the customer for the rest of the organization, you know, and be a facilitator, therefore, for the customer experience, apart from, you know, whatever it is, the responsibility that you mentioned, you know, there can be different responsibilities that are assigned to the marketing team. I think these are the three things I want to leave you with when we talk about marketing excellence.
All three are great. The very first one that you took, I think, is a fantastic litmus test. It's as powerful as Net Promoter Score in the context of customer satisfaction. I can imagine the power. You within a company, you go into other departments, take my budget, and they say no. They push back and say you keep it because it's doing better for the company, helps me get my bonus. Fantastic litmus test, actually. Veda?
I think, in my view, Shrikant, the real test of a well-functioning marketing engine, which hums like a Rolls-Royce, so to speak, is the amount of time and attention that they devote for doing the non-glamorous things really well. There is a lot of glamour associated with increasing top of the funnel, running that big brand campaign, right, which can put you out there. There is a lot of glamour quotient associated with that. But the real hallmark and the true sign of a really strong marketing team is the amount of time that they spend in customer engagement. People who already have some kind of an affinity, some kind of an interface with your brand, how closely and how strongly do you work with that pipeline, your marketing funnel, to make that as fat as you can make it to be, so that the drop-offs get minimized? How strongly do you focus on revivals and reactivations? How strongly do you work with business teams to make sure that the repeat business of the new customers that you've acquired and the stickiness of those customers is maintained, so that your lifetime value, your customer lifetime value is as high as it can be? A lot of marketers spend time in reducing the denominator in the CLTV CAC multiple, right? The CAC number and increasing scale, but not enough focus goes into increasing the numerator, the CLTV. To me, that is the sign of really strong marketing teams doing the non-glamorous things really well.
No, this is so true, because it is hard work. The results are not there for everyone to see out there up in the internet, but this is what eventually helps the company. So well said, actually. Thomas?
Yeah, so a lot of good ideas have come about. And I would say that marketing excellence for me actually is, firstly, it is about how you have engaged your customer and what is the kind of relationship you have developed with your customer, whomsoever it may be, whichever channel you're using. And marketing excellence, therefore, really means a very good customer experience. So you ensure customer engagement, you ensure customer acquisition, and you ensure more than anything else, as Veda just said, customer retention. I think that part about acquisition and at the same time retaining the customers becomes most critical so that you enjoy the lifetime value of a consumer, of a customer or a consumer. Secondly, I would say that, you know, marketing is not only about, as again pointed out, a very flashy brand campaign or a product campaign. It is a lot about all the below the line promotions and advertising which goes, or the below the line promotions or activations you do, particularly when we look at retail store concepts. I used to manage the ABRL network as the managing director. We used to focus a lot on below the line promotions and activations from store, which are far more powerful than any campaign or any kind of advertising we used to do. And therefore, the right and optimum mix of both above the line and below the line to ensure very high mind share of your product or your brand in the minds of the consumer, I think is very crucial going forward. So these two I would say, and of course, completely agree with the first point that Neelam had said, that at the end of the day, the whole marketing is all about generating revenues.
Yeah.
And there was another concept which I did mention in my presentation, is if you fail fast and
Yeah.
fail with least amount of damage to the company. Yeah, so this would be my take.
Great. I think you built very well on what Veda said and what Neelam said. Clearly, many common threads running through this conversation. Madhu.
So I think a lot of good points have already been covered. So where I would probably touch upon is, especially from a startup context, is a lot of marketing excellence also has to do with your product excellence. Are we meeting a very tangible and real problem that exists in the customers? Are we addressing a sizable problem for the customers? And then are we doing it in the right way, right? So marketing, as one of the panelists mentioned here, marketing has to be the voice of the customer for the product team and ensure that the right product and the best product gets built at the best cost. So product excellence eventually leads into marketing excellence as well. That's my take on marketing excellence for startups.
Great point, Madhu. Satya?
Thanks, Srikanth. I was actually listening to all of you guys and I forgot it was my turn as well. Some great points. What I realize is the panel here is actually touchstone. I mean, the startups that you have touched have turned into multi-million-dollar startups with a huge amount of cash. The average startup out there maybe has 20 lakh rupees or 30 lakh rupees in a pocket with a 5 years experience. Or if they have done it in a B2B format or a little later in life, maybe 1 or 2 crores. And out of that, they are building a product, they are doing the marketing, and that's all the budget that they have. So when it comes in the grand scheme of things, if they have to kind of get known and all the brand and all the discovery that has to happen either through Google, Facebook, Insta, YouTube, or Amazon, wherever, the average price of a keyword right now, post-pandemic, has gone 3x of what it was before pandemic.
Yeah.
There is no way that a startup can actually afford even being on any of these digital kind of, and definitely if a startup that has started in a low average cost, say sub 500 rupee product, they can never start. I mean, they can not survive in this. So then what does marketing excellence mean? I mean, they can't compete with anybody. They can't buy that traffic. They can't buy that display, and whatever they are buying is worthless because we are a country of 1.2 billion people, and at max they can buy 50 million views, 100 million views, but that will not cut it. So then what it means is that marketing excellence in my head has to be a department in the company that finds the arbitrage. 7 or 10 years ago, we could get a cost per click for 10 rupees. Now that cost per click is 120 rupees, app acquisition is above 1,000 to 1,500 depending on the category you are in. So that means that the marketing team has to find that arbitrage. If it has to play in those digital mediums like YouTube or in search, then they have to find really, really hard, literally like the level of research scientists, on how to bring that cost down. Because a lot of things that people keep on talking about, go to tier 2 towns, go to tier 3 towns, doesn't work. Actually, tier 2 and tier 3 towns are more expensive than tier 1 towns because the audience over there is limited and it's a bidding system for keywords. So finally, what I realize is what it comes down to is retention. Get whatever customers you can by word of mouth, by pitching, by retail activities, by ATL, whatever customer you get, then all your effort has to go into retaining that customer so that you don't have to spend that dollar again to get that customer back again. Get that customer. And my second advice here in marketing excellence would be that stop thinking in terms of buying, but start thinking in terms of how to pay the customer back. I mean, that's what I've seen work a lot. I mean, if there is a value that you're giving to Google or Facebook, try giving that value back to the customer. Maybe you will have a more loyal customer and your acquisition costs also will go down. So these are the two things that I wanted to kind of say about, talk about, because this is something that I am seeing a startup struggle a lot nowadays. And moreover, since pandemic, the situation has worsened and there's no end in sight. And most of the new funding that is going to startups. Sorry, I overshot.
No. I was marveling at how deep your thinking was on this topic. Clearly, you can see and feel the pain of the startups you've been mentoring, and you thought a lot about it. I was just marveling at that. And while you said one of the answers to having negligible budgets, you said is retention. But equally so, would you say that marketing excellence would mean the marketing team should be so resourceful and so innovative and so non-conventional, going beyond the obvious? They need to have their jugards to figure out ways to do things that have never been done before. I know that there aren't endless possibilities there, but they just have to be different. That's one. Second is, I'm picking up from retention and giving back to your customers. How strongly can I build on that point and talk about referral marketing, for example? How much hope would you pin on that?
So, Srikanth, I have some experience and I have been talking to startups. The challenges in referral marketing, for instance, one of the things on Amazon or any other platform is ratings, right? And those ratings and reviews become very important for you to grow your business. But there is also an invisible enemy in Amazon. Because if you do a referral campaign and if you're successful, and if many of those referees go back and give you a rating, Amazon starts blocking out those accounts. So many of these policies also kind of don't help startups unless you are playing in like millions. A small guy, very little. So referral will work outside of digital.
Okay.
But on digital, I'm still kind of working with a few startups to solve this. I think it can be solved. I don't have a ready answer yet.
Understood. Fantastic. Sudeep, your thoughts on marketing excellence?
I think excellence is like the word holy grail. We all strive for it and we don't get there, so it's always there. In my mind, hence, marketing excellence, if you have a seat at the table in the office, your decisions are respected, you drive company strategies, and there is respect for you, I think I would internally call it a good reference for marketing excellence that we have.
Yeah.
From the perspective of startups, I would say that if you are able to acquire customers and improve, like Atit said, the customer mind share, then you're doing a fabulous job in the perspective of what budgets do you have. That's my answer.
Great. Rohit, would you like to comment on this now? You heard various perspectives. I know you grapple with this question in all your portfolio companies.
Yeah, I have perhaps taken the most copious notes of all. I can guarantee you that. So it's very tough to come at the end, Srikanth, and add value on top of experts. But I'll tell you something which perhaps is somewhat different than the groups talked about. And I'm saying that as I interview, when I'm talking to CMO candidates, what am I looking for? And if that's any hallmark of excellence, I basically consider the profile an extremely critical gateway profile. In the company, he or she is the custodian of the market or the customer. And outside, he or she is the custodian of the product, the execution, the spirit, the soul, the DNA of the company. So therefore, when I look at this person, to my mind, very clearly, the person is having the ability to live a forcing function from the outside in into being the ultimate checkpoint for product readiness, execution, scale. Because at the end of the day, that is what you're taking out. And if that is not where that's where your first principles are. That's where end of the day, the real rubber hitting the road is. So that's a big forcing function. And similarly, going out, to me, the biggest thing that a CMO can do is create trust for the brand, the product, and the founder. So that's the outside in extrapolation. So that's really how I see this super crucial function together from an excellence standpoint.
Okay. Now I think we got some great...
Shrikant, I want to add, if I may.
Of course.
You know, one of the other ingredients, like I've always worked for a very large company and then a startup and then a large company and then a startup. You know, one of the other ingredients that I want to say here is that I think the well-funded startups, the boards, the founders themselves, everybody has an opinion on marketing. But I think if you hire a CMO or if you have a marketing team, treat them as subject matter experts. Of course, you know, you take a business judgment call, you know, and business comes first. But I find that in a lot of places, especially in startups which are small, everybody wants to take a marketing call. If you have a marketing team, then use them as subject matter experts. That becomes, you know, very important, and listen to them in that context.
That's true. Marketing is one of those areas where everyone wants to express opinion. You can't do that with code inside your product, but you can do it in marketing. That's true. Now, I think great insights. I have seen two questions.
One point.
Yes, of course. Go ahead.
Okay. So especially after listening to Satya and Rohit and all that, I remembered an article that I had written. One of the key things I think in marketing is to chase reality metrics versus vanity metrics. Especially in startups, especially in high growth startups, we see a lot of founders and marketing team chase vanity metrics, which may not be adding real business value or customer value. So I think going for the reality metrics, you know, eventually leads the company towards marketing excellence.
Yep, great point. Vanity metrics, so many people end up chasing them. You're so right, Madhu. There are two questions on the chat box there. One is from Saurabh Upadhyay. He wants to know what kind of time frame or time period should we look at for marketing to deliver results. I know Madhu's already answered the question. Does anyone else want to take a shot at it? Anyone in the panel? Time frame for marketing to deliver results. How much patience are you willing to have?
Yeah, I add to that. Sorry, please go ahead, Dipali.
Sorry. I'd like to say that I think each activity may have a different time frame in terms of delivering, but broadly speaking, the thumb rule is performance marketing side, the results should start coming in within the next quarter, so 6 months. And I think if you're doing thought leadership stuff, then you should ask the marketing team as to when it will start showing what kind of an impact, because some of them may move on to the next financial year. That's the thumb rule I use.
Okay.
Shrikant, the point that I would add on top of this is it comes down to the kind of sales life cycle duration that you have for your business. So if you're a B2B company with sales life cycles and gestation periods, which are like 6 months, 12 months plus, etc., it is going to take you a lot more time. If you say selling pizzas online, for example, where the sales life cycles are probably 5 minutes, 30 minutes, right? The lead is generated, interest is generated versus say conversion potentially. So it has to happen. It's going to happen within this time frame, right? Potentially. So the time frame for you to know if something is working or not working can be a lot shorter. In cases where it's a month, for example, in my previous organization at Health Family, it was a month. In Razorpay, it's a month, which is the sales life cycle, which is the average time it takes for a prospect to evaluate and take an action. In such cases, you also need to have lead indicators. You can't just have lag indicators, which is just conversion and revenue. You need to, you can't just wait for 4 weeks to know if your campaign is trending in the right direction, which is why you need to have some kind of lead indicators, which are things like engagement. For example, you started a new campaign, you look at what kind of engagement rates are people even launching your app, for example, it's an app for all of those, you know, installs that are coming through from your new campaign. That in itself can give you advanced signals. So you don't have to wait for the entire 4 weeks to know that your campaign is a dud. Right, so you can actually get these advanced indicators, which can give you some advanced signals as to whether you're trending in the right direction.
Stretch that logic further. If you're targeting the enterprise market where the sales cycle is 12 months or 18 months, You obviously don't get results in 5 minutes, but you can keep seeing whether the lead is moving through the funnel, and therefore what you do with that lead changes over a period of time in terms of marketing. So well said, both Dipali and Veda. Does anyone else want to add to this before we move on to the next question?
Just one point, I think very well summed up, but what my experience says is that between 1.5 to 2x of your sales cycle is what it takes time for marketing leads to result into a closure successfully. So I think the panel is more or less talking about the same kind of timelines. Just want to endorse that.
Okay. So next question is from Hanumandalu. What are the better methods to identify and reach the right consumers? I'm guessing he or she wants to know, is there an alternative to Google or Facebook where I can spend my money? I guess that's the question. Does anyone want to take a shot at stab at this one?
I mean, alternatives to Google or Facebook would be slightly difficult, but one consistent question that I'm often asked, Srikanth, if I were to paraphrase the question that you just mentioned, is how do I know for my dhanda what needs to be the number one priority, right? All of this gyan is fine, but tell me for my dhanda what needs to be the number one priority. One small rule of thumb, simple rule of thumb that I have is figure out first of all, if the category that you're operating in, is that mass or is that niche? Mass, what I mean is there already a lot of existing user demand patterns which is already manifested on Google? Are there keyword search volumes already on Google? If so, then you make Google your number one priority, a combination of SEM and SEO. Not all of us can be a Byju's, for example. We may not be able to create new user behavior and change user behavior patterns, but what we can very well do is we can piggyback and ride the wave on existing user keyword search volumes. So if you're mass, if you're lucky enough to be operating in a category where there is already a lot of latent demand manifesting on Google, ride that wave. That's one. If you're niche, but have a very strong emotional connect with your users, you're operating in the space of, say, a weight loss, for example, or fashion tech, right? A Healthify, a Cult Fit, or a Nykaa, or a Myntra, some of these cases where you can strike a very strong emotional resonance with your customers because you're operating on that kind of a space, right, which has a very strong personal bond. Then Facebook can work particularly well in such cases. I had a huge culture shock in health tech when Facebook was the number one dhanda driver. In all of the previous cases, it was Google search. If you're operating in that kind of a space, Facebook can work. LinkedIn can work well if you're in B2B and your key decision makers and your influencers for the decision in your target organizations are white collar working professionals, fairly active on LinkedIn. Right? If we were doing corporate wellness programs in the B2B space at Health Family, selling to CHROs or directors of HR and above, or CXOs who had the ability to influence. All, the TG, which is in this panel right now, all fairly active on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn was very good. Of course, you can't be lucky. We're selling to schools, for example. Not a lot of school principals are on LinkedIn. So it may not really work. So there you need more of a high touch model. Right. It needs to be event led, channel partnerships, etc. That's what you need to try. But if you're not lucky at all, right? If you're in a niche space and you're low on personal connect, for example, Razorpay, the kind of space that we operate in, they are a B2B payments company. We're not peer-to-peer. So it's not mass by any sense of the word. And let's face it, an entrepreneur who is the primary customer we work with doesn't wake up in the morning and get excited about the fact they're going to start using a payments product. Right? It's just the nature of the category. There's no point in taking it personally. It's not like weight loss or fashion for that matter. In such cases, because it's a double whammy, right? Your keyword demand is low, plus you're operating in a low personal connect kind of a environment. In that case, you focus on obviously your dhanda driving keywords, your payment specific keywords, but the sandbox there is very limited. But you also focus on slightly neighboring keywords, which have much higher keyword demand patterns, like for example, but relevant for your target customer. A lot of entrepreneurs have questions on how do I use digital marketing to grow my business. A lot of entrepreneurs don't understand GST. How do I navigate the GST compliance maze? A lot of entrepreneurs don't know how to read a P&L and balance sheet. So create content around all of this. Now, what is the relevance for all of these pieces to Razorpay's business in the here and the now? Very limited, but it's very relevant to my target customer, which is the entrepreneur, which is the SME business owner. So it gives me and it has much higher keyword demand patterns. Gives my brand an opportunity to get exposed to a larger audience, engage and nurture them over a period of time. I hope that helps. Yeah.
No, Veda, given that this was such a broad and open-ended question, you did such a fantastic job of kind of painting the picture here. Thank you for that.
Sure.
I'm guessing, Varun and Rohit, that we're out of time and I can't see any more questions in the chat box as well. But I must say that before I hand over back to Neelam, I was nervous at the start of the session. I've never moderated a panel where there were 10 speakers. I really didn't know how it would go in a 60-minute session. But it's been action-packed. It's been engrossing. There's so much I've learned and walked away from here. I'm sure the same is true for audience as well. So thank you, all of you. But I'm going to hand this over back to Neelam now for her final comments.
Thank you, Srikant. And Srikant, I must start by thanking you for agreeing to chair this panel. When I realized we are so many of us and everyone is very passionate about what they do. So managing this panel has been really great on your behalf and on behalf of us and the good questions which you asked us. I think we are at a stage where every startup is experimenting with new ways of marketing, new ways of doing things, new way of living. And that is going to keep on evolving as we go ahead. We are using digital, we are using analytics. Are we using it in the right manner? These questions come up all the time. And I do believe, as I mentor some of them, that either they go so deep into the technology or so deep towards the customer and not look at the balance. So my recommendation to everyone is, as recommended by the panel, look at a balance. Think about your technology, think about your customer, and then see, are you offering the right solution which they want? Indeed, it's been a very exciting panel discussion. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for being there for us today. I believe we had a great audience.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
All.